Hello, everybody, and welcome to this first session of our In the Mix podcasts. I'm Stephen Dolbeau, former journalist of the French economic newspaper La Tribune, and I will be the host of this new format that we're offering you today. In these podcasts, we will explore with our guests the challenges and opportunities for the energy sector in pursuing a carbon-neutral energy mix. And today I'm receiving Noé VAN HULST. Welcome, Noé. I'm happy to have you today. So, Noé, you are vice chair of the International Partnership for
Hydrogen
and Fuel Cells in the Economy. You're also
hydrogen advisor
to the International Energy Agency and advisor to the Dutch state-owned energy infrastructure company Gasunie. I hope I'm saying it right. And you're also senior fellow at Kligendal International Energy Program. So you have been working in the energy sector at an international level for the past 20 years, serving NGOs, governments, agencies. We only have 20 minutes, so let's dive right into the subjects. As I said, you've advised the MIX program team. My first question is pretty simple. What are the key topics for the energy sector in such a busy environment?
Well, Stephen, first of all, very happy to join you in this first podcast of a new series. There are an incredible amount of huge challenges for the energy sector going forward. Some well-known energy experts call it, the biggest energy crisis since we've known for a very long time, and also because of the depth of the crisis, but also because of how broadly it affects basically all the energy sources. Not only oil. We were used to oil crisis in the 1970s, at least those of you who are a little bit older like me. But now, we're talking about oil, gas, electricity, so everything across the energy sector. And I think the biggest challenge really is that since the war in Ukraine, the unfortunate war in Ukraine and all the devastation taking place, that the whole energy landscape is being reset in a way. Energy coming from Russia is no longer being considered as, a reliable supply source. And all of us in Europe and across the world are kind of struggling to see how that can be replaced. But of course, that is a huge challenge because there was so much energy coming from Russia, both in oil and in gas, but also even in metals. So huge challenge. And at the same time, as you know, Stephen, we have a longer term climate emergency, as some people call it, a huge crisis where we have to mitigate much stronger than we've done so far the CO2 emissions coming from energy. And so that is kind of a double challenge that the energy sector needs to face, that societies need to face across the world, and kind of combining this shorter term emergency situation, if you will, of replacing fossil fuel imports from Russia with the longer term challenge of keeping the energy transition, not only keeping the energy transition going, but even accelerating to meet that huge challenge. Again, that is kind of unprecedented, and we are all facing that. Companies, societies, and every organization that is basically dealing with energy.
Yeah, so you've presented all the challenges, saying the context is pretty tense, but isn't it actually an opportunity for the sector?
Of course, like always, indeed, you're right. A challenge is also an opportunity. There's a famous saying of never waste a good crisis, and this is true here as well. So the crisis is kind of a wake-up call for many companies as well as governments as well as countries of are we really sufficiently resilient? Can we deal with this kind of crisis? Unfortunately, the answer is predominantly no. I mean, we are not really well suited to deal with these kind of big crises in supply. And we need much more resilient energy supply, meaning more sources of energy to use, but also more supply routes, more countries that we import our energy from. So it's a huge opportunity to kind of straighten that out, to improve that also for the longer term, not only to deal with this crisis, but also to be more resilient, more resistant for future crises. And at the same time, also indeed accelerating the energy transition, because one of the answers or one of the ways to deal with the crisis surely is to be, less dependent on energy sources that come from abroad, and being able to improve particularly renewable energy that we can use much more at home. Solar energy, wind energy, in some countries also hydropower, of course nuclear power, as in France, which is of course very important, but also in other countries, as well as just also be, much more energy efficient. We tend to focus only on the supply side, replacing supply sources with other supply sources. But a lot also has to do with simply being much more efficient with energy and wasting less energy as consumers, but also as companies and as countries. So all of that together, yes, it's a huge opportunity to become more resilient, build more resilient energy supplies, become more or less carbon intensive, to switching much faster to less carbon intensive energy sources, as well as becoming much more energy efficient.
You're also bringing the question of energy sovereignty or independency. And it seems to be an effective motor today for advancing the subjects that have been blocked until now. If I'm thinking about what's happening in the United States, what's happening in Europe right now. Should states take back their should states take back their energy destiny in hand?
Well, definitely my answer would be yes, in the sense that the governments and countries should be more conscious of the choices that they make and the impact that this has indeed on the resilience of their energy system, and that indeed includes develop much more the sources that you can develop yourself, like we discussed before, renewable energy, really accelerate that and overcome many barriers in countries that still exist. As you may know, in Europe, countries are now only since recently striving to really accelerate, permitting process. It takes sometimes 6-7 years, for a license for a wind park or a solar farm to get developed. It takes more time often to apply for the license than to build the entire thing. That's of course completely not in line anymore with our priorities. So yes, develop more your own energy sources, including renewables, including nuclear, and again, become more diversified in the supply sources that you import. But we also have to be careful, Stephen. I don't buy, honestly speaking, that Europe, who has been a continent forever importing energy, by doing that alone can become, suddenly completely energy independent and doesn't need any imports anymore. That will be, really too tough of a challenge. mean, we can definitely mitigate, we can reduce this dependency on imports, but we will remain very much dependent also on the imports of clean energy. And also, do not forget that, you know, many of the renewable energies like solar plants or wind farms, they have a lot of what they call critical minerals or metals that go into those renewable energies. Think about steel, about nickel, about aluminium, about cobalt, many others. And those also tend to come, you know, from countries in Africa, in Latin America. So these need to be imported. And of course, even there, Europe could develop more of their own mines. But as you may know, in France and in many other countries, that is not entirely uncontroversial. You know, people are not generally jumping up and down to say, you know, let's open new mines in my region. So there's a difficulty there as well. So there will be still dependency also on imports, which is okay as long as you have, you know, a resilient supply coming from many different sources and many different countries.
As usual, Europe appears to be a balance point at the global level. But can it pull its weight against China and the United States? What do you think about that?
Stephen, it's one of these defining questions. I really, as a European, really do hope so, because it is more urgent than ever in what some people call, you know, new geopolitical situation, or some people even call geopolitical depression. And it's a very complicated geopolitical situation, and Europe can only be seen and be a really significant player if they can get their act together, meaning really on the most critical issues, and that includes energy policy, includes the way that we develop our energy sources, but also how we structure our international partnerships with those continents where we will still be, you know, getting our energy from, or our critical minerals from, like African countries, like Latin American countries. We need to develop that as those, you know, new partnerships on clean energy basis. But that can only really be powerful and can be done effectively as Europe as a whole, and not just France or just Germany or just Italy. That is not going to cut it in the end, in this, you know, bigger geopolitical game where China, the US, but also India and others are so big, and they have so much economic power, including, you know, the power of the purchasing power, I'm saying, of the demand side, that Europe needs to really act together. And that's really the challenge. And the jury is out for that. But as a European, I really hope we will be able to do that.
Okay. Do you think we're going fast enough to meet the climate challenges, and also all the business related to this? I mean, all the regulation and stuff that are related to the business of the energy sector. Do you feel we're going fast enough?
I do think that we definitely need to speed up. It is not going fast enough, not only in my view, in the view of many experts. So there are so many good plans, good projects also being proposed across Europe. But if you look at the lead times, Stephen, of developing those plans, of announcing those plans, and before, you know, they really can be brought to final investment decisions and to really building that necessary new infrastructure, it really takes way too long. You know, we mentioned before the example of wind farms taking 6-7 years. that's really unacceptable. So we have to cut that down to more acceptable levels, simply because of the urgency of the challenge that we need to face. We're running out of time, as we know. Climate is already changing. We are witnessing that almost on a daily basis across the world. So we need to really speed up, and a lot. So I think what Europe has shown, it can be done. In the COVID crisis, we managed to collectively act so fast in developing those new vaccines, getting them to the people, etc. That kind of urgency we need to kind of transfer to the climate crisis and to the energy security crisis. So we need to act much, much faster. And the examples are there. It can be done, in the Netherlands, and also in Germany. Because of the urgency, new LNG terminals have been built, floating LNG terminals have been built, in 6 to 9 months. Of course, under a lot of pressure and under a lot of urgent circumstances, but the examples are there that it can be done, even respecting, some basic, consultations and what have you. So we need to really speed up a lot.
You talked about the permitting, but what are the other key elements that we need to address in your point of view?
Other key elements are getting the regulation really in place. So there's a lot of private capital available around the world, but also particularly in Europe. Many investors, including not only from Europe, but also from the US and Asia, are willing to invest in Europe. But it needs to be clear, under which regulatory framework this can occur, and how people can, in the longer term, get their expected rates of return, etc. So once again, in legislation, getting the regulatory framework done, we need to speed up. It's going too slow, in the sense of going through all the motions, but we don't have the time. So we need again there to speed up with all the regulatory frameworks, get that across. Also the fiscal incentives, or the financial incentives to develop clean energy, to invest in clean energy, need to be much clearer, simpler. We have now the US example of the Inflation Reduction Act, which offers a very attractive formula and very easy to understand for investors on how you can invest in clean energy in the US. I know we cannot exactly copy and paste that in Europe, but we can do our best to have an offer and to show to the investors that Europe is basically doing more or less the same thing. If you add up a couple of things, what is done on the national level, what is done on the European level, but we need to kind of frame it in a way that everybody understands it, and that international global companies can present it to their boards and say, look, this is what can be done in Europe. That is not currently yet the case, but I'm sure that many people are trying to work towards this. But it's urgent. It's definitely urgent, because otherwise, we will miss out. Europe will miss out on a lot of global investments that could take place in Europe.
Thank you very much, Noé. We'll end this interview on this important message that we have to speed up on those matters. Thank you for this insightful interview. It was a great pleasure exchanging with you. I hope you had a good time with us. Thank you for listening to this first In the Mix podcast, and see you soon for our next episode.
Great. Thanks.